Your consciousness is the function of the reticular formation. And you are alert and you are responding. That itself is the indication for me that your reticular formation is working wonderfully. Okay. Now let us keep that alertness for the coming 1 hour or so. Okay. So now here is the brain structure. You have a clubbed shaped red part here. That is your reticular formation. Next slide. What is reticular formation? Reticular formation, it is, you see the part in the midbrain, pons and medulla. This part in the midbrain, pons and medulla having a network of connections, and these connections are obtained from anything going towards the cortex, centrifugal and centripetal, anything coming from the cortex. All of them give a what I called a collateral, a connection to this. And these one will form a networking. And in this networking, they will have a certain nuclei embedded. So now it is a cluster of neurons present in these extensive networking. Network means reticular or mesh-like in the brainstem, that is from midbrain to medulla, that is a mesenchymal to medullary component. This is a reticular area. And this reticular area hosts a number of important centers that govern our bodily functions. What are they? One, arousal. That means we are awake. And if we are awake, that means there is the opposite of awakeness or arousal is the sleep. So that means a sleep wakeful state is governed by sleep wakeful state, the arousal and the sleep. So these are maintained by these. They have a centers here, they communicate. Then attention. See what happens, you may have some background noise when you are sitting here. You have a background noise maybe from the fan coming up. Though the sound is coming, you don't hear. That means you are focused, you are attentive for a particular, whatever the motive you have. So that attention is kept with this center. Then mood. So all those mood changes brought about by the limbic component. That is through the hypothalamus, they are governed through the autonomic responses here through the reticular formation. That means all my facial expressions coming through the facial nuclei and the eyeball movement coming from the oculomotor and that trochlear nerves. And then we have, besides this, the brain activity, the entire brain activity is governed by the reticular formation, because now reticular formation sends impulses to the thalamus, then thalamus to the cortex. Reticulospinothalamic projections, they govern the brain activity, what we call as EEG. So that also. This is what we are thinking in terms of the upward. Downward, these motor activities are governed by the reticular formation or reticulospinal tract, also the vestibulospinal tract, especially the reticulospinal tract, which governs the gamma motor neuron activity. The autonomic activity means our blood pressure changes, respiratory changes, the sweating, so on so forth. The autonomic activity, the respiratory centers. We have those respiratory centers present in the pons, upper pontine region, the lower pontine region, the medullary region. So what we call as a pneumotoxic, apneustic, inspiratory and expiratory centers, which was described earlier. Nowadays, the pontine and the medullary centers. In the medullary centers, we have a DRG and VRG, and we have the pre-Purkinje complex, so on. All these respiratory centers are a part of the reticular system. We have a cardiovascular regulatory system, the cardio-acceleratory, cardio-inhibitory centers. That means these cardio-ventral medullary networking and the rostroventral medullary system. These are what cardio-acceleratory or cardio-inhibitory centers. So that is regulating the cardiovascular system. Regulating the gut, the movement of the entire gut, starting from the mouth to the end. So that the gut movement, that means starting from a mastication, swallowing, the movement of the esophagus, the gastric movements, the intestinal movements. So all these things are regulated by the reticular system. Since it is concerned with the arousal and awake response, the hormonal activity, especially the hormonal activity, which is governed by the pineal gland, which maintains our, which is a timekeeper, so which maintains our day-night cycles. So the day-night cycles are in turn associated with the hormonal activity. Besides, these are also necessary for the release of hormones at a particular time or a particular event, and many more functions. I repeat again: arousal response, attention response, the mood changes, sleep wakeful state, the brain activity, the motor activity, autonomic activity, respiratory activity, cardiovascular activity, gastrointestinal activity, the endocrine functions, and many more. Reticular formation is very diverse. That means in this, the medullary, pontine, and midbrain areas, it is in the core of those area, what is called a tegmentum. So now it contains various nuclei, and which some of them remain within the network, some of them ascend to the cortex, some of them descend to the spinal cord. So these are making the intrinsic networking within this reticular formation, and ascending, going to the cortex, various cortices, and then spinal cord. Due to the heterogeneity and the structure, the boundaries are not clear for these nuclei. Only, okay, let us say, for example, there are boundaries for respiratory centers because these are cluster of neurons located at particular location. There are boundaries for cardiovascular centers. There are boundaries for a swallowing center. There are boundaries for a mastication center. There are boundaries for a cough center, vomiting center, so on. But the other nuclei are not well demarcated. So in the reticular formation, we worry about those other nuclei in addition to those specific nuclei. That forms this, make it very complex. However, it is now clear that reticular formation is highly organized and a very intricate, complex mechanism that is essential for our survival. If the reticular formation does not work, that means you are not awake. You are in coma. That's exactly what I'm trying to impress upon you. So that means a reticular formation is a very important part of the nervous system. So that is essential for the function of the rest of the entire cortical and cerebellar functions. Now, going to the next, where is this reticular formation? I just brought that same picture here. Reticular formation is found in the area of the brainstem. This is the brainstem. This is the reticular formation, the red club-shaped part, which starts from the midbrain there and ends here in the medulla. And this area is known as a tegmentum. This is somewhere here. This is tegmentum. It is the descent of this tegmentum, and it is located almost inside in the core. Now this core, this side is the ventricle. Here is the third ventricle, and here comes the lateral ventricle. You have the ventricles here on one side, and the other side, the surface of the pons and the medulla. You can just see that tegmentum is a heterogeneous section of the neural tissue that extends vertically through the brainstem, like this. And it's a portion of the brainstem that lies between the ventricles and the other surfaces, so that is the pons and medulla. So that forms the reticular formation. Okay, so now move on. So now just taking it, because if you are going back, this is the lateral or sagittal section. If I take the coronal section, only through the, this is the midbrain structure, and you see the reticular formation in these the green and red labeled areas. So now I have what I have. One is the inner red area. This is a paramedian reticular nucleus. The paramedian reticular nucleus. So this paramedian reticular nucleus is a Raphe nucleus. It is having a serotonergic projections. So then we have, this is a pons. This is a rostral pontine reticular nucleus, and a caudal. This is a rostral caudal, and these will down, and these are magnocellular. The cells of these nucleus, or the neurons, are larger, very large. Now we have on the lateral side, these are medial side, paramedial side. This is medial and this is paramedial. This is the on the lateral side you have this green one. These are pontomedullary parvicellular reticular nucleus. Parvicellular. I will come back to that maybe in the next slide. Parvicellular, and we have the lateral reticular nucleus. So that means we have anatomically 4 distinct nuclei. One is midline, or just paramedian reticular nucleus. This is a Raphe nucleus. Then comes, this is a pontomedullary, rostral pontine, and then caudal pontine and a medullary. This is a medullary component. So then we have this parvicellular reticular nucleus on the lateral side, and a lateral reticular nucleus in the medulla. These are the areas. Now coming back, same thing, same cut. If you are saying here, this is where the section is made. This is where the section is made, and that means it's in the medulla, because this is cerebellum there. This is the inferior peduncle of the cerebellum. Then that means it must be in the upper medullary or upper lower pontine level. So that means between the junction wherein the respiratory neurons are remaining. And if you are looking at this, you have this medial paramedial nuclei. These are Raphe nucleus, I said. So I said these are paramedial. These are clusters of neurons there. These are paramedial Raphe nucleus. These are descending and ascending up. So then these are medial group. That means next to the paramedial, there are these things. These are magnocellular, large cells. These are large cells. You have these large cells. So then we have a lateral nucleus. These are parvicellular, small cells. Let me go back to the previous section. This one is Raphe. This is a magnocellular. This is a parvicellular. Coming back here, this is parvicellular. So that means these are the various nuclei present in the medulla or medullary region, and you just have these ventricles and remaining part of the medullary sections. Okay, so now, so these form the various reticular nuclei, reticular formation. Now going back to the, what are the afferent connections of the reticular formation? That means when we are taking up the nervous tissue or a nervous system, we consider that a nervous system in terms of the connections, the nuclei, and the efferents, then functions. Now come back, what are the afferent connections of a reticular formation? One thing I said, it receives inputs from all sensory modalities from various parts of the body. That means we have the pain, touch, pressure, proprioception. They are all ascending up. When they are ascending up to the either the lemniscal pathway or a non-lemniscal pathway, they ascend up. When they ascend up, they give collateral to these, and these collaterals are made a network or a mesh. That information they receive every bit of information which is going up, especially those information regarding the pain that is very much required. Regarding the crude touch, I was trying to talk about the crude touch, so that is also very important, and the thermal sensations, because crude touch has to be dealt in a separate manner. Is that is some emotional touch. That's an emotional touch. Whether it is you try to discriminate it as a good touch or a bad touch, something like that. So now that all sensory modalities from various parts of the body are giving here. So they give projections here. That's one. The second, if you are looking at the olfactory component, olfactory sensation does not enter into the reticular system directly. It will go to the olfactory cortex, and after reaching the olfactory cortex, it comes back to the thalamus, and through the thalamus it receives inputs about olfactory components. So that means the arousal response in response to smell. Suppose you are smelling something that is, but however it is less developed in case of a human being. Anyway, that's a different matter altogether. So now then we have thalamus. From thalamus you receive reticular information. One of those instances I told about the olfactory response, and other limbic responses and all other intra thalamic nuclei, they send the information back to the reticular system. And these reticular system, because they receive, thalamus receives inputs from the basal ganglia, cerebellum, and all those things are partly relayed back into the reticular system. Especially they reach to the olivary and the pontopeduncular nucleus. Then we have the olfactory. I have mentioned olfactory and the limbic cortices. They give projections to the reticular system. Then we have a cortico-reticular. So that means the cerebral cortex, any part of the cortex, they give the reticular inputs. We have the motor cortex, we have the corticopontine or cortico-reticular fibers. They end up here because they are for the regulation of the posture. We have this occipital cortex. Occipital cortex is for the vision. Now the vision is possible if the eyeballs are focused. If the eyeballs are somewhere else, what the vision can do about, what the retina and rods and cones can do about it. So that means the eyeball should be brought into the particular focus. So that has to be from the occipital cortex, it receives. That means all areas. That is why I mentioned the cortico-reticular. All areas of the brain, they give projection to the reticulum. So maybe frontal cortex, maybe parietal cortex, maybe the occipital cortex, maybe auditory cortex, or from the limbic cortices. They all do that. So then hypothalamus. Hypothalamus is an important structure. So they also project onto the reticular system because they have to regulate the autonomic nervous system. So that is coming up. Now the cerebellum. Cerebellum gives inputs to the reticular system. There are two components, dentatopontine or all the vestigial to the vestibular system and the interpositus to the reticular system. So you will get all those inputs from the cerebellum. That is cerebello-reticular inputs. So now we have inputs from periaqueductal gray and lateral brachial nucleus. So they also give inputs. That means these are the afferents. They receive from the lateral brachial nucleus and the periaqueductal gray. So now the periaqueductal gray, so that is trying to govern the pain sensation, and that would also stimulate the raphe nucleus. Lateral brachial nucleus, that will activate the reticular system. That in turn keeps the arousal. At the same time, it gives information to the amygdala and hypothalamus and the limbic cortex. Now, NTS2, the nucleus tractus solitarius. So that is one of those things which the vagus gives. And these inputs, they are coming from the vagus. Then we have got information from sympathetic. We have got information from the swallowing group of muscles and the respiratory group of muscles. So these NTS projections, they also give afferent infos. So there are several interconnections because these are all interconnected and they give the inputs. So now the list is exhaustive. I have given these things. The best example is it receives the inputs from all sensory and motor and cortical modalities. So they are, it is the center which receives information. So that means this cluster, they say that, okay, this cluster should be activated. Once it is activated, that focuses, that builds back, that funnels your attention. So as I mentioned, the auditory cortex now sending you the noise produced by your fan. So I will just tell you an example. Usually we travel by train. The train journey, you are going in a sleeper class. It will have a tremendous noise. Still then after some time we sleep. We don't hear that noise. How that is possible? That is possible because of the reticular formation. Because now that suppresses that information and it focuses only for the sleep status. Otherwise, if you start worrying about the sound the moving train produces, it is tremendous. So now moving on to the next. So now what are the centers of the reticular formation? Now I have divided into three group of centers. One, specific centers. Two, centers monitoring the cortical activity. Three, centers monitoring the spinal activity. Now looking into the specific centers, one, the group of specific centers in the reticular formation is the respiratory centers. I need not to tell about the neural regulation of respiration. I have already mentioned we have the pontine and medullary respiratory centers which govern the rhythm of the respiration. Not only rhythm of the respiration, at times the reflexes of the respiration. If something is there, coughing, the forceful expiration, or sneezing, very explosive expiration. So that means this is brought by the respiratory centers. Then cardiovascular centers. These cardiovascular centers are necessary for regulation of the blood pressure or the blood circulation. So now this blood pressure and blood circulation, that is governed by the cardiovascular system. And also these cardiovascular centers are associated with the cardiovascular system and the respiratory system. They are associated with the oxygen supply to the organ. That means the oxygen sensors, the chemoreceptors. So that's again coming to the respiration. Now the autonomic responses, that is responses of the vagus or the parasympathetic or responses of the thoracolumbar outflow, that is governed by the respiratory. These are specific centers. The swallowing center, you have seen deglutition. The deglutition, you have a swallowing center. Initially, we initiate the swallowing voluntarily, then subsequent stages, second and third stage, are involuntary or automatic. Then we have a vomiting center, and we have that is closely associated with the swallowing center. We have the mastication center, that is again even before the masticatory muscles. All the masticatory muscles are the trigeminal and facial and these things are hypoglossal now. They are in one go. So that means the masticatory muscles. Now the centers for the facial expression, we become happy, angry, and all those things, facial expression. Now eye, head, neck movement. So that means eye movement in relation to the head and neck, because if I have to focus on to a particular system, so now I have to do that. So now even we have a centers for the bladder and bowel movements, because we have three set of centers for the micturition. One micturition center is there at the spinal level and at the midbrain level and at the cortical level. So now the cortical level is only it is regarding the social behavior, total presence or absence of these things. Same thing with the bowel. So now these are the specific centers. Then now the centers that govern the cortical activity. So now thalamus is the primary center. Thalamus is the primary center that keeps our alertness, arousal, attention. Alertness, arousal, attention. That is thalamus. Then we have a raphe that governs the activity of a certain part of the brain, which is necessary for the emotions. Then this locus coeruleus, this is a norepinephrenergic, that is the locus coeruleus is the center there in the upper pontomedullary area, and that will be governing the norepinephrenergic neurons that would also necessary, and tegmental is a cholinergic neurons, and again we have a histaminergic neurons. We see each one of them as I go further. Then we have, that means the centers for arousal response, center for maybe sleep, raphe nucleus for sleep. This is also sleep. Tegmental for the activity, histaminergic for the sleep behavior and all those things. So these are the center for cortical activity. The foremost is the arousal response, keeping you awake. Then we have centers that regulates the spinal activity. In the spinal activity, we have already seen the pain modulation. The pain modulation is coming from the raphe nucleus descending projection and the locus coeruleus nucleus descending projection. That is one component. Then the motor activity. In the motor activity, we have the facilitatory reticular system, reticulospinal tract, inhibitory reticulospinal. Then visceral activity. Visceral activity means they are governing the autonomic nervous system, which are secretory motor fibers. Now, going further, this is what I have made. One, these are ascending projections. You can just see that this is a raphe nucleus, the midline raphe nucleus. Then this is a medial, this is a magnocellular, this is magnocellular. These two things are ascending projections for arousal and attention. Okay, so now these green ones from some of these midline and then magnocellular or parvocellular. These are for intrinsic. These are intrinsic connections. These are for eyeball movement, swallowing, brainstem reflexes, respiratory centers, cardiovascular centers, and all those centers. The cough and the vomiting, so on, so forth. Then we have the descending projections, one from the raphe, the second from here, and third from here. So they are necessary for control of muscle tone, respiration, arterial pressure, then the motor activity. Efferent connections of reticular formation. So now I have already mentioned about these efferent connections when I am talking about the intrinsic, ascending and descending projections. Again, I highlight upon them. So the efferent connections, we have the ascending one from the reticulothalamus, the reticular system to the thalamus, reticulothalamic tract. Then we have the reticulobasal ganglia. So that will go there, pontopeduncular nucleus to the basal ganglia. And that is going through the substantia or nigra compacta. So then we have the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and hypothalamus. This is received from the lateral brachial nucleus of the thalamus, the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and hypothalamus. Then it will also give projections to the red nucleus, the reticulorubral fibers, pontoreticulorubral fibers. Now, intrinsic or collicular, pontine, and olivary, which are giving to the pontine nucleus and olivary nucleus, then giving to the vestibular nuclei, then giving to the raphe nucleus from the periaqueductal gray to the raphe nucleus, then locus coeruleus. Some of these connections are interconnected, locus coeruleus. The respiratory centers are connected. The caudoventral lateral medulla, retroventral lateral medulla, that is where the baroreceptor functions are monitored, or a dorsal respiratory group of neurons, the ventral respiratory group of neurons, a Bolginger complex, so on. These are the respiratory centers. The swallowing center, vomiting center, cough center, sneezing center, eyeball movement, so on. You can have a number of them. The medial reticulospinal, the inhibitory, lateral reticulospinal, excitatory, so that is the descending projections, and the raphe spinal for the pain control mechanism. That is the efferents going from the reticular system to various systems. Now, let us examine the ascending reticular formation. The ascending reticular formation is also known as a reticular activating system. Reticular activating system is the network of a number of synapses in the brainstem. And these synapses, they reach to the thalamus, reticulothalamic tract, and there is the intralaminar nucleus of the thalamus, and to the reticular nucleus of the thalamus. Then they project diffusely to the entire cortical mantle, and they will activate all the cortical elements. So that means for an event, we will be focused for a particular thing, and the more focus is given to a particular element. Suppose if this is missing, you will not get that EEG waves. Then these collaterals, funnel into not only from the long ascending sensory tracts, but also from a trigeminal, auditory, visual, olfactory systems. So that means it receives inputs from all those sensory modalities. So that means all the sensory modalities are clubbed together, they reach, and from here through the suprasynaptic pathway, they reach the reticular activating system. So now there is a greater degree of convergence with these, and there is no specificity, and they are just only either arousal or non-arousal. The system is therefore non-specific. Unlike the classic sensory pathways, the touch is carried and the touch is meant. Now nothing is, you will not know anything. You will see only you are awake. That is what the function of the reticular activating system. Here is the projection there. Maybe I will next pathway. I am just telling the efferents to the thalamus, the reticular system. They will reach here to the internal medullary lamina. This Y-shaped internal medullary lamina. They are projecting in, and this would have a connection, interconnections with all the number of areas within the thalamus. This is thalamus. Now this is the lateral view. We have the reticular nucleus. They also project onto the reticular nucleus. They also project onto the external medullary lamina, and we have the midline nucleus. So this is a midline nucleus. So outside is the external medullary lamina, and we have the reticular nucleus somewhere here like a cap, somewhere here like a cap. So all these areas, they receive inputs from the reticular system, and from here, these reticular system, they project onto the different areas of the cortex, all the areas of the cortex. So now this is the midbrain reticular formation. From here, the inputs are reaching to this whatever the intralaminar, internal medullary lamina, that is intralaminar nuclei, and from the reticular nuclei and other midline nuclei, they project onto all the areas, and it is aroused. So this is one of the component of the afferent, and this keeps arousal or awake state. Suppose if this is diminished, this activity is diminished, then we may go to sleep. If this activity is totally disconnected, you may go into coma. So one is a temporary state, another is a permanent or the irreversible sort of a situation. Because a person who is sleeping, I can wake him up, but a person who is in coma is difficult to wake. Now, just coming back here, it is I am just trying to the filters and prioritizes the sensory information. Let the mind be focused and alert. I was trying to tell about the sound of a moving train. The RAS best known for its role in promoting arousal and consciousness. This is the function. RAS contains circuits that originate several areas of the brainstem. That means the entire, and they will reach the cortex via thalamus. These are associated with a number of transmitters, especially the acetylcholine and norepinephrine. I will show about that. The cholinergic neurons come from the pontopedunculaar nucleus and the tegmental nucleus. The norepinenergic neurons originate from the locus ceruleus, and they will be for these two will be for wakeful state, vigilance, and arousal. These pathways from the reticular formation must be functional for normal attentional abilities, that is the sleep-wake cycles, if it were to be happen. Lesions of this reticular activity system temporarily may impair the consciousness, as happens in case of anesthesia. What happens in case of anesthesia? The reticular activity system is shut down. So the person goes into a unconscious state. So that is temporarily it may shut down, or if there is a damage because of the head injury or something like that, person may enter into coma, and once he enters into coma, he may not come back a vegetative state. Now, though there is some repetition, let's take it because we have reticular formation is the primary regulator of arousal and consciousness, because I want to impress upon you the autonomic and endocrine nervous system along with the circadian centers of the brain are all subject to regulation by the reticular formation. Because you know that the circadian cycle is dependent upon the conscious state or the sleep wakeful state. So if that means the light dark cycles and the sleep wakeful state, if they are disturbed, the circadian cycle is disturbed. Now this circadian cycle that regulates here, that regulates the entire endocrine nervous system or mechanism or the entire functions of the endocrine system, especially in relation to hypothalamus. So that means once you disturb the circadian rhythm, so there will be hypothalamic dysfunction. So the person may have, especially if they are ladies, there may be amenorrhea, there may be abnormalities of the menstruation may happen, or other things. Maybe it may produce the infertility because in case of the hypogonadic activity. So that means this is circadian cycle is disturbed. Now, descending reticulospinal and reticulobulbar are involved in the craniosacral, parasympathetic and sympathetic outflows, the descending reticulospinal projections. Modulates the somatic visceral sensation by its action according to the ascending tracts and project to supraspinal regions. This is particularly important as it relates to the involvement of reticular formation in pain suppression mechanism, gating mechanisms, the Meljack-Walsh, the gate control theory we were talking about, that would suppress that. So that means reticular formation also impacts the muscle activity. So that means I have listed some of those functions of the reticular formation. Now going back here, the various the transmitter systems. So this one I have taken it from Genong. So we have here in the first, this is the locus ceruleus here. From the locus ceruleus, we have the projections to the entire cortical array. So this is the prefrontal cortex. So this is the nucleus accumbens here, and then the motor cortex there. So the parietal cortex, then the somatosensory association area there, the posterior parietal region, and then we have the occipital cortex there. Then we come back here to the amygdala or the limbic system. So these limbic, this forms the cingulate gyrus. This forms the cingulate gyrus. That means it covers the very large area of the brain. Just look at that. Now that means it starts from the locus coeruleus and it goes up. This is one ascending projection. Descending projection, it reaches to the spinal cord. This suppresses the gait in the spinal cord. That means for the gait control theory of pain, especially the lateral spinothalamic tract, the projecting neurons are suppressed presynaptically. We have this one, serotonergic Raphe neurons. These Raphe neurons, they are Raphe nucleus here. They would activate these neurons, the upper mesenchymal regions, and then they will go on to the same areas, almost same areas. You look at that, these are projections there. This is the cingulate, and then we have the inner, this is caudate nucleus. So these project onto the basal ganglia, the limbic system, and the neocortex. So that is the Raphe nucleus. And descending down, you can just see that descending down, it will go on to the descending fibers to the gait theory. Now we have the acetylcholine. They are coming from the tegmental area. From the tegmentum, that is the upper part of the midbrain, or in the midbrain. So they reach to the septal nucleus. This is septal nucleus. This is the basal nucleus. And from the basal nucleus to the prefrontal cortex and other areas of the brain. And the septal nucleus to the cingulate gyrus, the limbic system. So that forms the activity. And now from the septal nucleus, it comes back to the hippocampus and the amygdala. So there are three pathways that it would activate. This is what the cholinergic component, and especially this basal component, the basal cholinergic area, nucleus basalis, and this component is especially essential for the memory. Alzheimer's disease, this part is affected. This part forms the circle of Maynard. So that is a cholinergic, and this is missing, or they will lose these connections. Then you will lose the memory function. Now these are ventral tegmental area, dopaminergic neurons projecting onto the prefrontal cortex. Also, they will have a spillover effect on the substantia nigra. This is substantia nigra of the basal ganglia. They will go to the basal ganglia for the movement and the cognitive activity. So these are the connections of the various. I will just take you further. I will take you further a little bit. So now the norepinephrine and the dopaminergic areas. So now you just see that already I explained how that is going on. And this is a ventral tegmental dopaminergic, this is dopaminergic. These are all motivational reward system. It will go to the nucleus accumbens. These cholinergic, these are also motivational, keeping the alertness, because you see the entire range, especially entire range of the cortex is involved. So these are the dopaminergic and norepinephrine connections. Then comes the cholinergic connections. I have already explained. Cholinergic connections have a septal nucleus and the basal nucleus. The basal nucleus is for the memory, especially the prefrontal cortex. It is associated, and the limbic connections it is associated. So now that would keep the entire cholinergic component. Then we have the serotonergic and histaminergic component. This forms the histaminergic component, and these two are associated with the sleep and wakeful state. You know, you people have taken the afternoon curd rice. Curd rice, we the South Indians, so we eat, and this curd rice has a lot of serotonin coming up because it has the casein there that has a serotonin increases and that produces the sleep. Similarly, you must have consumed the antihistamines. Histamine keeps the alert state. Histamine keeps one awake state. If you cut these histamine or antihistamines, usually we take it for any allergic reactions or a cold or anything, running nose. So then antihistamines that makes you drowsy because this circuit is supplied. So this is one part. This is for histamine and this is for serotonin that is coming from the rough nucleus. This is coming from the the tegmentum to the tuberomammillary area of the hypothalamus or around hypothalamus. Now, coming back, so now let us see what is happening there. Suppose if there is a sectioning, part of the cutting of this cortical activity. So once the cortical activity is there, the impaired awareness. So that means you become vegetative. That means you don't have all those new higher functions. You may survive. You may breathe. You may do certain reflexive activity. You may feel hunger. That's different. But you don't have those emotions, or you don't have the learning and other higher functions. Now, if this is cut, this dashed line, so now what is happening? The entire reticular system, this is the reticular system there. If this is disconnected with the thalamus, this is thalamus. And if this is disconnected, he will go into a coma. Okay, temporarily if I suppress these activities, that is anesthesia. Or still temporarily, or in a normal these things, temporarily this activity is lowered. And say, for example, sleep is not only the decreased brain activity, but at the same time, there are some sleep centers which are active to keep us or make us asleep. This is the impaired arousal, that is the coma, if this is cut. So that means a person with a coma will have some type of a disconnection from the reticular system to the cortex. Then if it is coming below here, so brain is dead and it is a brain death. So that is the different levels of lesions for the reticular system. Now coming back to the intrinsic nuclei, circuits of the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves, circuits around the motor nuclei of the cranial nerves, responsible for the face, head, and movement. So that means eyeballs move, so that you will have the focused these things. Also, they are essential for secretomotor activity of the visceral function. So that means tears and the pharyngeal secretions. Circuitry around the vagus facilitated motor activity associated with vagus, and these are swallowing and vomiting, respiratory functions like breathing rhythm, then coughing, sneezing, that is a respiratory rhythm, the cardiovascular functions, the maintenance of blood pressure, that's the cardiovascular, and all the cardiovascular reflexes. Then we have around orofacial motor responses for chewing and eating. So that means the trigeminal, facial, and hypoglossal nerve, they produce the masticatory response, and they are for chewing and eating. That means a masticatory response. So now the facial nerve is for emotional facial expressions like coughing, laughing, crying, or whatever the expressions we make by the face. Okay, these are intrinsic nuclei. Now, descending reticular system. The descending reticular system are primarily involved with the modulation of a sensory and motor pathways. Projections of rough nucleus, they descend to the gate theory. That means they project onto the gate which is made there which is on the projecting neuron, and these serotonergic fibers presynaptically block it, and the lateral spinothalamic tract, which is originating from the projecting neuron, is suppressed. So that means they control the pain. Same thing happens with the locus ceruleus, that also suppresses the pain by the descending projections. In addition, the descending projections are necessary for regulations of posture, movement, and also movement of the stereotyped movement like stepping, walking, and holding on. So these muscle tone, these all are either supported or inhibited by this. Medullary reticulospinal tract is inhibitory to the gamma motor neuron. The pontine reticulospinal tract is excitatory to the gamma motor neuron. So let us check it. So look here. This is the reticulospinal. Number 5 is the reticulospinal projection. This is a pontomedullary. So this is excitatory, and this is exclusively medullary. This is inhibitory projection to the gamma motor neuron. In the previous slides, I have discussed about the functions of the reticular formation at each level while I was describing their anatomical connections and their relations. Here I am listing the various functions of reticular formation at one site so that everybody can remember and recapitulate. This would be essential when you have been asked a question like the functions of reticular formation. The list is exhaustive. I have only enumerated, I think, 11 functions. That would be good enough for anyone to take forward. Number 1, reticular system is involved in, especially reticular activating system is involved in the arousal response, arousal and attention response, and even awake state. This arousal and attention state is mediated through the reticulo-thalamocortical projections. Number 2, reticular system is involved in the sleep-wakeful state that is mediated through the reticulo-thalamocortical and reticulo-hypothalamic projections, that is from the brainstem and the midbrain, the mesencephalic part, the sleep or the wakeful state are maintained, especially the hypothalamus. Number 3, reticular system is involved in the expression of the emotions, that is emotional responses. Especially these expressions of the emotions come from the limbic and hypothalamic outputs, who are modulating the autonomic system, especially the parasympathetic through the vagal outputs and the sympathetic through the descending projections to the lateral column of the spinal cord. Reticular system modulates the EEG activity. That means that normally when the eyes are closed, it is the slow wave in the EEG. And when we open the eyes or when there is some sensory stimulation, this slow wave activity becomes a fast wave beta rhythm. Reticular system, through its descending outputs to the gamma motor neurons, modulate the muscle tone, the posture, and pattern activity. Thus, the reticular system governs or controls the motor activity. Number 6, it regulates the autonomic activity, especially parasympathetic and sympathetic. Number 7, the very important part of the reticular system is maintenance of the vital centers or the vital areas in the medulla, especially the pons and medulla, the respiratory centers, cardiovascular centers, and other centers which govern the GIT and the visceral functions. Number 8, reticular system governs the circadian rhythm and also regulates the endocrine function of the hypothalamus in terms of releasing certain hormones from the hypothalamus. Reticular system is involved in the reflexes that govern swallowing, mastication, vomiting, coughing, sneezing, baroreceptor reflexes, the chemoreceptor reflexes, which regulates the blood pressure. Number 10, reticular system modulates the pain at two levels. One, at the periaqueductal level, where it releases the endogenous opiates and prevent the transmission of the impulses to higher up. The second, it will inhibit the spinal gate control mechanism by descending tract, especially the bulbospinal tracts originating from the raphe nucleus, or even to an extent from the cholinergic locus coeruleus outputs to the spinal cord. The number 11, it is very much involved in the reward and punishment centers as it is connected with the mesolimbic dopaminergic connections. Thus, reticular system governs the number of vital functions in our body. So now keywords for your examination purposes, these are reticular activating system, the functions of reticular activating system, raphe nucleus, cholinergic projections, dopaminergic projections, descending reticular formation, facilitator reticulospinal tract, inhibitory reticulospinal tract. These are keywords. Try to prepare them, try to make them. So you may not get all these details in your textbooks. Maybe my notes would be very useful to you. So now, then next class we will take about electroencephalogram. Questions for today. I'm just giving you some 4 questions, short note questions, parts of reticular formation, descending reticular system, reticular activating system, functions of reticular system. Please write them in brief as a notes. For your work in the assignment book, describe the various parts, connections, and functions of reticular formation, and also write notes on efferent connections of reticular system, reticulothalamic projections, reticulospinal tract, intrinsic nuclei of reticular formation, pain modulation by reticular system. So you just write it in your assignment book so that be ready. Okay. Thank you so much. And I hope the reticular system is I have covered in broad or in a comprehensive manner. There is a lot of things assembled here because some of them are not there. If you open up Genong, you may have a half page or so, or other books I have not seen. Guyton is also very sketchy. You may have the other things there. So now I have just clubbed all those things, and you have wonderful notes for you. You just work on that, and that is fine.